labor inspector, so this is my area of interest. I think based on what's been presented already from the presentation from earlier, there's a really strong case made for the potential for a hazardous workplace or for a hazardous industry. And to me, that kind of says, okay, does that mean that the work itself is hazardous, or is there a lot of hazards that are present? So I think those are two different questions. And when we're looking at these hazards and the entire sector, does it apply equally to all parts of the sector, or to specific tasks, or to subsections of the industry? Because if you're looking at the declaration of a hazardous workplace, what positive impact will that have on decent work and safe work for the people of Bangladesh? And like, will it positively impact or negatively impact women, young workers, all of the workforce? And something I'd be curious to know, I've seen lots of the hazards listed where they exist, but is there more information that can be gathered on the severity? So I know there are hazards, but what's the severity of the hazard? How often is it impacting the worker? How frequently are they exposed? Because having a hazard present or a potential hazard present doesn't necessarily mean that every worker is exposed. So is there areas of work where you want to ensure that certain people shouldn't work for increased safety, or certain sectors of the subcategories where you want to protect people from a more hazardous working experience versus an overall general sector? And a lot of the points I'm going to discuss have already been mentioned, but will the declaration then increase access to things like improvements to the industry? So looking at the list of hazards and issues that are mentioned in the presentation, a lot of those things are pretty, I wouldn't say easy, but things that can be either mitigated or mostly eliminated with some pretty straightforward controls. So stepping away from PPE, things like engineering controls or following the hierarchy of controls is eliminating certain chemicals. If a chemical is carcinogenic or cancer-causing, use a different chemical. If there's an issue with the ventilation or dust control, have those measures in place, right? So is the work itself inherently hazardous, or is there potential that can be eliminated with either assistance or initial design of the workplace through licensing and inspection? And I think something else to consider, and I think it's been mentioned as well, if you're doing the analysis on potential hazards or the impacts of the hazards, with the upcoming updates to the BLA, there's going to be changes to the list of occupational diseases and occupational injuries that are more extensive. So that would impact a decision of whether or not it's a dangerous workplace or a hazardous workplace, as well as the OSH conventions, the ILO OSH conventions, which upon ratification at some point will also impact that analysis. But like looking at things like use of equipment and pinch points and crushing injuries or exposure to chemicals, if some of the more higher risk or high hazard work was to be automated or equipment was utilized, that would decrease the hazard, but it would also eliminate work for some lesser skilled workers or lower paid workers. So if that were to be a way to mitigate some of that risk, you would also want to say, okay, in the spirit of having safer, decent work for everyone, those people whose positions have been eliminated by like trying to make some automation or better controls should also then be retained and trained for use of the equipment or automation and maintenance of the equipment. So then it becomes a safer workforce, but then the workforce is also a higher skilled, higher trained, and then higher paid workforce. Because when you have the mitigations or the controls that are inherent to the workplace, instead of just relying on things like PPE or training and things, if the risk is eliminated at the source or earlier in the development, long term, it's a lot cheaper, both to the cost of the employer and the worker, but also injuries, etc. If you're looking at an EIS or employment insurance schemes, if you reduce the hazards and at the source, long term it's going to be cheaper to make sure everyone is safe and you're not spending money on equipment to mitigate environmental issues or injuries, or to try and get PPE that needs to be trained for and maintained and replenished.